want to contribute our topics, have any questions, or just want to tell us what an amazing job we're doing, you can reach out to us at 6364252164. Now let's jump right into it. Today's topic is the importance of friendship, a biblical perspective. And we indeed have a special guest for the show, Pastor Johanan Premkumar from the Church of Praise, Bangalore. Pastor, could you please tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Thanks for having me, Yohann. My name is Johanan Premkumar, and I'm serving as a pastor at Church of Praise. We're an independent interdenominational church, Tamil and Kannada based, and the church has been running by God's faithfulness for the past 31 years. It was started by my uncle, and after he passed away, my father took over, and after my father passed away, my mother is the president of our trust, and I'm serving as a full-time pastor within this capacity. So yeah, so that's a little bit about me and my ministry as a pastor.
It's indeed a real pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, Yohann.
So,
Hey,
for
we
this
share the
edition,
same name.
yeah, I know. So, for
Mhm.
this edition of the Reality Bang, Pastor and I will be having a discussion regarding friendship on a biblical perspective and give you guys a better viewpoint of this topic. So, my very first question is now, of course, there are a lot of biblical scholars that say friendship is the whole theme of the Bible. So, could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I find that question very, very interesting and important, Johan, because yes, several Bible scholars do say that friendship is a whole Bible theme. Now, to validate that, it would be very helpful to see what Genesis, first of all, talks about friendship. If we read Genesis rightly, Genesis chapter 1, right, when God creates the whole world. Notice whenever he's creating living things. On day 3, he says, let the earth bring forth plants and vegetation. On day 5, God says, let the sea bring forth sea creatures and the air bring forth birds, right? And on day 6, when he's creating man, right, he speaks to himself. So I recently came across this observation when someone was asking, when God wanted plants, he spoke to the ground. When God wanted birds and fishes, he spoke to the air and to the water. But when God wanted man, he spoke to himself. So the idea behind that is, if you take plants out of the ground, they die. You take
Yeah,
fishes out of the water, they die, right?
yeah,
And the same idea is, if man leaves fellowship with God, he dies.
yeah,
So Paul talks about this later on when he says in Acts, right? In him we live and move and have our being. So this level of interconnectedness, of dependence on someone, that is the level of friendship and fellowship that the Bible begins with. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 8 and 9, you see God walking in the cool of the day, right? After Adam and Eve have sinned. And what does that mean? What do those figures of speech mean? The cool of the day is like the most chill time of the day, right? And God is
yeah,
just coming to like hang out with Adam and Eve. And he's searching for man. He asked the question, Adam, where are you? Right?
yeah,
When our friends are like are not like at the place where we've agreed to meet. Let's say we're going for a dinner or like for a hangout or something, right? When they're 2 minutes late, we'll be like, yo, where are you? Right?
yeah,
So
exactly.
God is right. The purpose why God is like reaching out is fellowship, right?
Yeah,
And so talk about the whole friendship as a whole Bible theme. It makes sense because most of the core aspects of biblical doctrines, like all the core biblical doctrines, they fall under all the different facets of friendship. In friendship you have fellowship, right? And then you have God looking for man to fellowship with him. You see Jesus choosing his friends. Friendship has trust, right, where you share things with people. That comes to another point of friendship. Friendship has vulnerability, where you share even the deepest things with your closest friends. Friendship has sharing or giving, right? Which is another fundamental aspect and quality of God. God so loved that He gave, right? Friendship has dependability. You see that God trusting people like Abraham, Enoch, and He shares everything with them, right?
yeah,
Um, um, uh, Friendship has Holy Spirit is addressed as a person who is walking alongside with us, right? And cares for us and takes care of our walk with the Lord. Friendship has forgiveness, right? Just because something bad has happened, like even though it may be a terrible betrayal, you still look for the opportunity to forgive because of all the history of friendship, right? So if it's something that can be
Exactly.
fixed, people will look beyond the error. So and you look at all of the core aspects of biblical doctrine like forgiveness, repentance, salvation, or faith. All of these are basically spiritual strands of the larger context of like friendship. So I think it's very valid to say that friendship is a whole Bible theme in that sense.
Yeah, that was indeed a very interesting take. Now, let's move on to the next question. Now, of course, it is said that Proverbs is a book that guides us in all aspects of life, be it in be it in relationships, be it in um, wisdom. So, could you tell us a few proverb verses that help us in forging true friendship?
That's another great question because out of all the several verses that you see in the book of Proverbs, you'll notice that it's hinting at certain important aspects of friendship. Like, for example, if you were to ask me what are some of the most important verses on friendship in Proverbs, I would say Proverbs chapter 12:6 and Proverbs chapter 18, verse 24. Proverbs
Yeah,
12, 6 says, "The righteous should choose their friends carefully because the way of the wicked, the lifestyle of the wicked, will lead them astray." So you may be a
yeah,
passionate God follower, but if you have people around you who are not going to lead you in that direction, it's going to lead you to compromise on your own personal values. Uh,
exactly.
the other verse that I talked about, right? Proverbs chapter 18, verse 34, it says, "One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend that sticks closer than a brother." So it's basically saying you can have many friends who may be going in the wrong way and they may be terrible people. And if you surround yourself with those kind of people, you're going to come to ruin, right?
Exactly.
But a true friend is someone who sticks very close to closer than a brother, right? There's another verse that says, a friend loves at all times, and the brother is born for adversity. So all of these proverbs, including so many others, they're basically talking about, the people who are true friends. They stick around in the worst of times, and they're the kind of people who give the most important counsel. Proverbs 27:6 says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend," meaning and the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. Meaning,
Yeah,
even if a friend hits you on the head for something that is wrong or something that he sees you're doing wrong, that's better than an enemy who flatters in front of your face. So there are so many passages in Proverbs that gives caution about the kind of friends that you choose, and to
yeah,
make sure that you observe what kind of people each person is in different seasons of life, especially in the hard times. Some of the other
yeah,
important verses in Proverbs is Proverbs 19 verse 4 and 19 verse 6. "Wealth attracts many friends, but even the closest friend of a poor deserts him." Basically saying,
yeah,
you'll know who your friends are only when you come to a place where you have nothing to give anymore. A core
yeah,
aspect of friendship is giving, but then when you have nothing else to give, who sticks around just because they cherish their relationships with you, right? Those are like the true friends, when even they stick with you despite the fact that you have nothing else to give. So I think these are some of the most important things that the book of Proverbs has to tell us about today, which are very, very important words, especially in very important seasons of life.
yeah. Indeed, those are very, very, very deep meaning verses. So, moving on now, let's look at the third question. Now, what is God's idea of friendship in the Bible? And specifically, now, what does Jesus teach us about friendship? Because he teaches a lot of things during his parables. So, what exactly does he teach us about friendship?
That's really cool. And I have a feeling that this question is going to take a little bit more time. Um, This is a very, very important one. Uh, First of all, God's idea of friendship. What does the Father think about friendship?
Yeah.
And then we'll come to Jesus, who wraps things up very, very poignantly. Um, you may have heard of, many people using this Hebrew word chesed, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Hesed essentially is a Hebrew word that occurs around 250 times in the Old Testament. The
Okay.
first time it's used is in Genesis chapter 19, verse 19. And the last time it's used is in Zechariah chapter 7, verse 9. In between these two verses, like this word is used like around 250 times in the first 39 books of the Bible. And Hebrew scholars have struggled to translate this or capture its essence in other languages, because that's how deep and that's how significant a word it is. On a very fundamental level, what it essentially means is loyal love. The Bible translators and of different translations try to translate it in different ways. Compassion, or the loving kindness, or faithfulness, these kind of things. But I think the best set of words to describe it is loyal love. There's loyalty involved, and where there's loyalty involved, it shows you where the priority is. Like, what do you
Yeah.
love the most that you would be loyal to protect it, and give yourself for it. And God relates himself in the Bible as the one who, how do you say, the one who is overflowing with chesed. you know Everyone he
Yeah.
meets with, he and has a personal like relationship or fellowship with, he extends this chesed to them. The most beautiful place that we see this happening is in when God meets Moses on the mountain, right, in Exodus chapter 34. And he's
Yeah.
revealing himself for the first time. The Lord, merciful, gracious, slow to anger and abounding in loving kindness. You see the word hesed over there, right?
Yeah.
And he gives us a picture of what that's like. He punishes guilty people up to the third and fourth generation, but he
Hmm.
keeps covenant with people who love him for 1,000 generations. Now that is what the picture of God's chesed is. It's either used in terms of God's relationship with man, or man's relationship with another person who is of high value, right? And you see that God kind of like has relationship with Enoch, for example. In Jude verse
Yeah.
14, Enoch is talking about the second coming of Christ, of how the Lord is coming to judge. How does someone who is like seventh from Adam, like way back, way before Noah, knows about what's going to happen like way in the future, right? And Genesis chapter 10 sums it up quite well in saying that Enoch walked with God, and he was taken. So that is,
Yeah.
I think, one of the most deepest places of God's friendship with someone that you see in the Bible. That a man was known for like his walk with God in that way. So, um, coming to what Jesus teaches on friendship, right? I found this very striking when I was just like meditating on John chapter 15, verse 13 to 15. Jesus' farewell address to his disciples. Now he says, so this is Jesus' idea of friendship summarized. Greater love has no man than this, than for that man to lay down his life for his friends. And then he looks at his disciples and says, I no longer call you servants, because a servant doesn't know what his master is doing, but I call you friends, because everything I learned from the Father, I have made known to you.
Yeah.
So in this place where Jesus is talking about friendship, he hints at one of the most important qualities of friendship being trusting someone with something, or giving someone uh, that level of sacred personal treasure. So a friend is basically, according to that passage, someone who entrusts personal matters It's a very vulnerable place to be. But friendship is fundamentally and essentially giving. Uh, you know, if you're in the same gospel, like John chapter 3, verse 16 talks about God so loved that he gave.
Yeah.
So, towards the end of his life, Jesus is talking about friendship in terms of entrusting some giving, you know. So, that is like one of the most core aspects of friendship that, Jesus kind of like summarizes what God himself is like, and also what, true friendship is all about. Complete entrusting of everything that is personal. He talks about it in another parable in Luke chapter 11, verse 5. And I love this parable because in the Gospel of Luke, right after he talks about the Lord's Prayer, he talks this parable, and then he moves on to the passage on ask and it shall be given to you. And the parable is about which one of you who has a friend, when he has need of bread, late at night, he goes and asks his friend, and he says, I need to borrow some bread from you, basically. And Jesus basically says, even though that man wouldn't, get up to give his friend bread on account of their friendship, at least because of the shameless audacity with which he asks, he will get up and give his friend what he needs as much as he needs. That idea
Yeah.
of shameless audacity, being in friendship, where you and I are so comfortable with one another that I can come and disturb you at any time. Like usually I'll be courteous towards everyone else, but I would come to you and be very open to you about my embarrassing need, right? And I would disturb you for that shamelessly. I have the audacity to come and ask you, but then I also have the
Yeah.
shamelessness to tell you, like, hey, this is actually my situation, right?
Hmm.
So that kind of usually you would have that kind of a thing within family, right? But then to have it with someone outside of family, now that is where, like, this idea of friendship comes. And Jesus is basically telling us you can go before God and ask with that same kind of shameless audacity. you know like you can go before him and say, look, I'm shamelessly standing here and I'm in need, and I'm asking you because where else am I going to go, right? Like
Yeah.
that is the kind of relationship that Jesus is kind of talking about, friendship. And he's relating that with the kind of relationship that we have with God once we are in, like, covenant with him. So I think that
Yeah.
is the basic and the most how do you say, the deepest expression of friendship in Jesus' teaching, where even
Hmm.
before God, you have the kind of relationship with him. Like he's judge, he's creator, he's king, he's God, all of this. But you can go and knock on his door shamelessly with audacity and ask him for what you need, you know? So that, I think, is God's idea of friendship, in the Bible, where he entrusts everyone he meets. And he tells them all of his personal things, that plans that he's about to do. And Jesus says, you can ask, a friend is someone who gives and shares his most personal, information, and, like, things, vulnerable things that he shares with his friends. So I think these are some of the most important things that you see in terms of God's idea. Like he wants that level of openness and trustworthiness among one another. And that's why just before that John chapter 15, 13 to 15 passage, Jesus says, this is my commandment to you, love one another in this manner. You know?
Of course, these are very, very, very good points there. So, of course, the Bible talks about various instances of friendship, like as you told, Jesus spoke in his parables. Now, there are also various other examples, like Jonathan and David. They were also considered very good friends. Now, what can we learn from these kind of friendships, and how can we apply these kind of aspects of friendships in today's modern age?
The friendship of David and Jonathan is a very interesting and valid example that we need to be looking at a lot during our time, Johann. Because in our common generation, in our current generation, we are living with a lot of, uh, we do life with no basis, like solid basis of what are the rules for all of these different things that we go about every day. So, for example, one of the things is that in relationships, right, things can tend to escalate and go in all kinds of direction when there's no boundaries in them. Now, I say David and Jonathan being interesting because in the Bible, we see that the Bible literally describes their friendship as they loved each other more than women. Um, you can Many people tend to like misunderstand that and talk about it in terms of like a homosexual relationship or whatever it is, and that is quite a rampant topic, a sensitive topic in our times, with everything that is happening all around the world. But one of the things that you can very clearly see is that is absolutely not what the Bible is talking about, their friendship. And the Bible is actually telling you that you can be friends with someone of the same gender in such a deep, meaningful way, and that comes with boundaries. Sometimes people enter into friendships or relationships, and they think that when I was talking about not doing life without without a basis for knowing how to do things nowadays. Um, when you don't know which boundaries to set where, when people think about this is the natural progression or evolution of the kind of things that I feel in this relationship or in this friendship, the Bible talks about boundaries being set. This is where the aspect of covenant comes in friendships. I love you enough not to breach these kind of lines, and we can have the most meaningful and closest friendships and companionships, and it doesn't need to be something that transgresses God's laws. That kind of friendship takes a lot to navigate, but it's not too much once you know what the Bible is talking about, and once you know what a God honoring relationship and a friendship is. So friendship with boundaries is like one of the most important things that you see in the story of David and Jonathan. That you can love someone so much, and the way that is preserved is when you have boundaries set for it. When people start crossing boundaries in whatever capacity, that's when even the most deep and meaningful friendships can become sour. Yohann, are you there? I'm assuming there's a technical issue. I think the last question that Johann was. Johann is
Yeah,
back. Hi, Johann.
yeah.
Yes.
Sorry about that. A few technical
Yeah.
difficulties. Okay, so
Sure.
my last question is going to be, of course, this was a very interesting take about the fourth question. I was able to hear all of it, but unfortunately, my video was not
That's fine.
coming on. So my very last speaks about friendship being like a covenant. Now, could you explain this a little bit deeper?
Covenant is basically a very deep and binding bond between two parties in the Bible. Usually, a covenant is made between a stronger or a greater party with someone who is much, much more inferior. This is why you see, God making covenants with people, right? And the idea of a covenant is it's not just a contract. It's not just like something that can be broken. If a covenant is not maintained, the person in the Old Testament times, the person who is making a covenant should die. Okay?
Yeah,
If they haven't kept their side of the covenant. Okay? Imagine how many imagine how many divorces would not exist if that was the kind of binding language that was used in covenants today, right? Like if you don't
yeah,
keep covenant, you die. But that was basically, what God was doing with a lot of people. And friendship being a covenant, the idea of the sacredness of friendship, when you say that friendship is a covenant, it is bringing all of these other ideas to mind. Of it is
Yeah.
binding, you don't break it, you be faithful to it, loyalty is involved, and it's a very, very sacred and personal space to be in, right? So
Yeah.
um, uh, when we think about covenant in the Bible, one of the most predominant figures that comes to mind is Abraham, right? We think
Yeah.
about God making a covenant with Abraham in Genesis chapter 15, right? And he goes through all of the rituals of the covenant just to make a point to Abraham, saying, "Hey, if I don't keep my promise to you, I'm saying, I'm accountable to die." So
Yeah.
this Abraham throughout the Bible is described as God's friend.
Yeah.
It's interesting when God makes a covenant with someone, he immediately talks about them as friends. Second Chronicles chapter 20, verse 7. People are remembering this covenant and they are saying, "Oh God, did you not drive out the inhabitants of this land before your people Israel and give it to the descendants of Abraham, your friend?" Right? Isaiah 41, verse 8, God tells Israel, "But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, you, descendants of Abraham, my friend." In the New
Yeah.
Testament, James chapter 2, verse 3, James recalls this and says, Abraham believed God and it was credited to him for righteousness, and he was God's friend. You know, so every time you see, the most important covenant being invoked, God's friendship with Abraham is also automatically being invoked, you know,
Yeah.
and that is basically driving home the point that, friendships are binding covenants. Job chapter 6, verse 14 is a very interesting verse because it says, "Anyone who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty." Now that is a very interesting verse. It's basically saying if no one respects, the sacredness of friendship, and he withholds, his kindness towards his friend, he is not fearing God. He is not doing something that pleases God. You know, and we all know, the importance of the fear of the Lord when you read the book of Proverbs, right?
Exactly.
Now, so that is the idea of, friendship in the Bible. Jesus, like coming back to like John 15, in John chapter 18, he's arrested and then he's dying for the sake of covenant. When he's having his last supper with his disciples, right? He's talking about a new covenant that is being made. But then just before he starts instituting all of that, or in the context of all of this, he looks at his disciples and says, "Hey, you guys are my friends." You know, so that's why this covenant aspect is given to you. So the idea of relentless. I think just before the show started, we were talking about anime and like Naruto and the kind of friendships that we see there. I mean, just
Yeah.
coming back to like Naruto for an example, it's like half the show is basically all about him chasing after his friend, trying to bring him back,
Yeah.
right? Like to
Yeah.
what extent would like friendship go? And it finally ends in like a spoiler alert fist fight. Like he's trying to beat
Exactly.
sense to his friend, saying, "Even if you destroy things, I'm not going to let you destroy yourself," kind of friendship. So that's,
Exactly.
of course, anime tends to like have a lot more exaggerations and like deep lessons there, but that's literally the extent to which God went, right? The most
Yeah.
important Christian doctrine, reconciliation with God, in Romans chapter 5, is being talked about in the concept in the context of we were once in enmity with God, but God
Yeah.
gave His Son and made peace, putting away the enmity, and now we have friendship with God. We have this relationship with God restored. The kind of friendship with God, coming back to Genesis 1, is when we're friends with God, that is when we as human beings flourish, just like a tree flourishes, on the soil, whereas sea creatures flourish in the sea. That is what friendship, with God, being in line with covenant, is being explored about, like throughout the Bible. And yeah, so I think that's friendship being invoking these aspects of covenant is something that we see repeatedly being talked about in the Bible.
Of course, these are very, very, very relevant, especially in today's generation. Like, nowadays friendship doesn't even mean anything, but from what you said, like, of course we can take guidelines from these various points and, forge our friendships to be even stronger and even more important. So I
Yeah,
just want to tell you that it's a very huge, it's a very huge pleasure to have you on the show, and a huge thank you to sharing these points on the show to
my
all our
pleasure. My
viewers.
pleasure.
I'm sure each
Thank
of
you
us
for
will
having
take.
me.
Thank you so much, and I'm sure each of them will also have various takeaways from this show. So, with that said, that officially brings us to the end of today's show, and a huge thank you to Pastor Johanan for joining the show.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And remember, guys, we air on Mondays at 4:30 p.m. That's it. If you guys want to contribute to our topics, have any questions, or just want to tell us what an amazing job we're doing, you can reach out to us at 6364252164. And a huge thank you to our listeners for tuning into this edition of The Reality Bang, your weekly dose of your power, brought to you by FEBA Online. This is RJ Yohann. Hope you have an amazing week, and I'll see you next Monday. God